Balkans in the European security architecture. And the first speaker will be Marko Kovacevic, Faculty of Sciences, University of Political Sciences, University of Belgrade. He is currently a master student of international security, International Security Faculty of Political Science, University of Belgrade, as I said, and his research interests include security studies, regional security complex theory, Euro-Atlantic relations, and U.S. foreign and security policy. So he will talk about implications of state building in the regional implications of state building on the regional security dynamics within regional security complex theory. Yes, floor is yours, Marko.
Thank you, Alper. Since we are very short with time, I will skip all the unnecessary introductory points and go straight to the matter. The title of my paper, which is Implications of State Building on Regional Security Dynamics within Regional Security Complex Theory, is very straightforward. And my honorable predecessors, among them Mr. Caliber, also had a chance to make some points about the regional security complex theory in general. However, I would like to point to the context of my paper, which is that weak states represent a serious threat to international security, which was elaborated by Hellman and Ratner in their 1992 article for the Foreign Policy magazine, and they were the first to point to that matter after the end of the Cold War. However, the second major point, which is important for our context of this matter, is the changed nature of conflicts after the end of the Cold War, which is primarily the prominence of intra-state conflicts instead of interstate conflicts, which was the major point after the end of the Cold War. However, the third point, which is very important for our discussion of the role of the state and its capacities, is actually declining capability of states to resolve these conflicts, which were thriving after the end of the Cold War. And as a consequence, some new solutions were needed to resolve these conflicts. And one of the most prominent solutions was external intervention and certain form of external engagement into matters of other states. And in the words of Stephen Krasner, sovereignty was seen as a capacity more than it was seen as a right. However, the major point I want to make here is that actually within the context of the regional security complex theory, which actually analyzes the regional level of analysis, and it tries to reflect on the security problems from the regional perspective more than from the global or from the national level of analysis. My point here is that within the concept of penetration into security dynamics of other states from other external actors, is that actually penetration can be seen as state building, or vice versa. State building strategies that are applied from external actors into other security regions, or for this matter, security complexes and subcomplexes, can be seen as a strategy of state building. To phrase it differently, state building can be seen as a factor that can influence security dynamics of a security region. And point B that can be made in connection to this point that I already mentioned is that state building is a form of penetration of external actors in the security dynamics of other states. However, it is important to mention why this topic is relevant and why it is very important. The position of state building as a concept actually thrived in the security studies after the end of the Cold War. And this concept should be seen within the security studies. Also, this concept has had a great relevance among the political sciences in general, but also within the international relations theory, and now within security studies, this concept should be studied. And it has certain security implications which are of relevance. By bringing together the concepts of state building and state weakness, it is possible to see state building as an international mechanism which can be used for removal of those security threats that have their origin in state weakness, of course, at a regional level. Third point, thus, state building can be, and it is, a factor that can influence regional security dynamics, whereby, using the analytical framework of regional security complex theory, state building can be seen as a form of penetration of external actors into regional security dynamics. Why is this relevant? First, this is mostly theoretical paper, and it deals mostly with theoretical concepts, and also it has practical and policy application, which has not been the primary subject of my investigation here, but in the course of my further research, it can also gain its relevance. Security problems are better understood at the regional level of analysis. As Buzan and Weber point, security threats travel more easily over short distances than over long ones. So that is why the regional setting is also the locus of the most of the security risks. Also, this approach offers an additional avenue for understanding security dynamics, in particular security regions or security complexes or subcomplexes such as the Western Balkans. Security dynamics can be seen in three ways: from conflict formation to security regime to security community. And here I found an important and very interesting concept of security community that was actually analyzed by the Bulgarian political scientist Kowalski, who actually analyzed the Western Balkans as a form of an elite security community. And I wanted actually to connect this concept of elite security community as a form of security dynamics with the regional security complex theory. But within the regional security complex theory, authors, Buzan and Weber and others, they didn't analyze state building as such, as a factor that can be seen of a relevance in this analysis. In this manner, actually, I wanted to because I deal with certain definitions. In order to have this state building as a variable in the analysis of regional security, one has to define what is the state. And by finding an appropriate definition of what the state is, one can employ certain state building strategies and can actually observe state building as a policy strategy that is applied by external actors as a form of their penetration in the regional security dynamics. Briefly, I observed the definitions of state by Durkheim and Weber, which are actually sociological definitions, and their application is very limited in the security studies. So it is necessary to find a more comprehensive definition of state, which is actually developed by Buzan in his 1991 book, People, States and Fear. So without tracing this definitional path, I would like to point that state is seen as, I would phrase it, as a unity between these institutional structures of government with certain levels of socio-political cohesion. And there, this definition of state, which is applied by Buzan, is actually uniting these two conceptions and enables one to trace how actually institutional state building can be made. And on the other hand, this socio-political cohesion is very important, because only by analyzing institutions within a state, it is not possible to get these security dynamics, because for the security dynamics itself, this socio-political cohesiveness is probably a source of security problems. And by solving this by solving this problem of socio-political cohesion, it's probably the best way to cure certain security problems and probably affect the security dynamics. But in order to do this, one has to find certain forms of security dynamics. As I mentioned, in the literature on this security dynamics, on state building and on security theories in general, it is possible to employ state building. And my point of reference in a practical political way is the region of Western Balkans. And now what is important is that the enlargement policy of the European Union vis-à-vis the Western Balkan region can be seen as a form of security penetration. After the period of wars in the Balkans from the 1991 to 2001, it is possible also to say that there were several phases. First, after the conflict ended, there was this post-conflict reconstruction period. And then the European Union and other external actors actually had a prominent role in building first peace and then trying to foster certain cooperation within the region, and then also to strengthen what? State capacities and institutions of those states present in the region, and probably try to affect the level of socio-political cohesion as the second element. As Kowalski mentioned, the security community, the concept that was actually proposed by, which was actually later developed by Adler and Barnett in their 1998 book, and with also the front runner, which was Karl Deutsch in the 1950s. This concept of state building and security penetration is well connected. Because through building institutions and through accepting certain norms by the local political elites, which actually cooperate within the region, under the framework which was proposed by the European Union, it is possible to develop certain features of cooperation and certain norms that help to build this European zone of peace, or actually to extend this European zone of peace to the Balkans. And it is very relevant to, within the concept of the regional security complex theory. One shouldn't slip this, that actually the regional security complex theory is the theoretical framework I'm taking into consideration, and it has its own intricacies and its own rules. But what time do I have left? Well, in order to be on time, I would like to just point that it is possible to observe the penetration of external actors in the Western Balkan region as a form of state building, and there are several ways to build a state, and one has to take into consideration both the socio-political cohesion and the institutional patterns, and also one can also trace the examples of international state building in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Kosovo. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Marko. Sorry, I should be tough on the time concerns. And so next speaker is Vladimir Trapara, the University of Belgrade. So he graduated from the Faculty of Political Science, the University of Belgrade, and he earned the MA degree in the same faculty, and he's currently doing his PhD, basically, at international and European studies and working as a research associate at the Institute of International Politics and Economics. So his title is Positioning of Western Balkans in the Emerging European Security Architecture, 3 lessons for the countries of the region. Yes, Vladimir, please try to try to remain within the confines of 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will, because I have everything written on paper, and this is not much. My fellow colleagues, I shall present you the main elements of my work, which considers positioning of Western Balkans region in the emerging European security architecture. Observe that I use the word emerging. It means that I do not see the current European security architecture as stable and durable. The problem is that the Cold War ended more than 20 years ago. But although there is no more ideological rivalry, strategic division between the former adversaries has not been completely removed yet. Since 2009, there is a security dialogue between USA and Russia, based on President Medvedev's 2008 proposal for a European Security Treaty and Vice President Joe Biden's call for a reset in Russian-American relations. Results of this dialogue are for now very modest, but one cannot deny that there is a clear trend towards rapprochement between the former rivals. I do not have time now to present you my analysis of factors that influence this process and that could contribute either to success or failure of this dialogue. I have written about it elsewhere. I will just say that contemporary Europe has an urgent need for a success of this dialogue in order to achieve a truly comprehensive and indivisible security on the whole continent. We can hope that this need will gradually lead to the establishment of such security regime in which neither side, USA or Russia, will have an exclusive right in making decisions on continental security, but both will work cooperatively to improve it. So, I follow this trend towards new European security architecture and see the current situation as temporary. What does this mean for Western Balkans, a region of deficient security, fragile political stability, and several frozen conflicts that could lead to the repeating of violence from the past? My point is that the states in this region should learn 3 lessons before making serious decisions on their own security. Those 3 lessons are: take a global context into account, base the intra-regional dialogue on addressing real conflicts of interest, and think of integration as a means, not an end in itself. I repeat, global context, conflicts of interest should be considered, and integration should be viewed as a means, not an end in itself. Lesson 1. What do I mean by global context? It is exactly what I have spoken about, a trend toward a new European security architecture based on ex-Cold War rivals USA and Russia's partnership. The problem is that local governing elites scarcely pay attention to this trend. Instead, they rely on the current distribution of power, bandwagoning with those foreign actors that could best serve their short-term rather than long-term, and narrowly conceived national rather than regional interests. Most of the Western Balkan states, with an exception of Serbia, tend to become members of NATO, if they're already not, like Croatia and Albania. They do it because they see it as the quickest and cheapest way to protect their internal stability and foreign security, which they see as being threatened by the strongest state and the biggest ethnic group in the region, Serbia and Serbs. What is wrong with this approach? It cannot lead to a stable long-term regional security because it freezes the current political solutions in the region, which are based on NATO's biased policy and actions during wars in the last decade of the 20th century throughout the region. Namely, NATO took sides in these conflicts, helping Serbian neighbors to achieve some or most of their war aims at the expense of Serbs. So, United States of America during the 90s decided to balance against Serbia in order to prevent its possible domination in the region after the breakup of Yugoslavia. That is the real cause of NATO's intervention during the 90s in this region. In doing so, the West went too far in weakening and humiliating Serbia, transforming her into a revisionist state that will sooner or later try to alter the unfavorable status quo by all means when an opportunity arises. And the opportunity could arise if a broader European security situation gets worse as a result of Russian-American security dialogue failure. Integration of the region into NATO is not an adequate long-term solution because the eastward expansion of NATO works against this dialogue and consequently against European and global and therefore regional security. So here I also want to deeper get into reasons why Russia is opposed to NATO eastward expansion. Instead of securing their spoils of war by joining the coalition that looks stronger and in control at the moment, countries of the region should look ahead and get in line with a trend towards a new European security architecture, at the same time remaking the current political situation solutions in a way that they no longer produce revisionism. This leads us to the lesson number 2. Not only Serbia is revisionist, there are also other states like Albania and Croatia that are not quite satisfied with what they currently possess and may tend to initiate new violence when an opportunity arises. It means that all countries of the region should work together to overcome or at least soften their conflicts of interest in order to achieve political solution equally acceptable for all. To be successful, they would have to abandon false moral and emotional consideration, such as discrediting the other side because of war crimes it allegedly committed or because of the nature of its internal political regime or ideology, and to take into account only pure interest considerations as a base for compromise. Also, they should give up on mythical approach and falsifying history and start at the careful assessment of reality. And lesson 3, by doing this, following the mentioned trend towards the new European security architecture and overcoming conflicts of interest among them, states of the Western Balkans region should keep in mind that integration into a broader security regime cannot be a magical solution for their problems. It is only one of the means for achieving the long-term regional security and stability, not an end in itself. Foreign actors with whom local countries are to integrate should be called upon to help this process if they wanted to, instead of relying on them as if Western Balkans countries gave up on their sovereignty, national and regional interest for the sake of some wider grand design. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. You were quite successful in the timing. Thank you very much for this. Okay, so the next speaker is the Florian Marsiek, and who is a research associate in the European Governance Program of the University of Luxembourg, and a researcher in the Prague office of the OECD Secretariat, actually. He is also currently working on a joint PhD in the University of Luxembourg and Vienna. So the title of Florence presentation is Western Balkans and the EU in multilateral organizations, measuring Europeanization and understanding the politics of alignment. Now, floor is yours.
Thank you. So now we are. So this is the last paper. Some of you see the last paper as the last after a long day. Some of you will maybe see it as the last paper before the forthcoming glass of wine with President Tadic. I'll try to capture your attention for just 10 minutes on just this very moment and to draw your attention on the changes in Western Balkan states' foreign policies that have been brought about by the EU over the past 10 years. So, this is what we call this Europeanization research agenda. There are many, many different the definitions of the concept. I will not go there. What I'm doing is, and how I define it, is as a convergence change in foreign policy. So it is an operational definition. How do I measure that? I measure that by looking at convergence trends, especially in two multilateral fora, the OSCE and the United Nations General Assembly. In the OSCE, I'm looking at to what extent did Western Balkan states align themselves with EU statements. In the UNGA, what I'm looking at is to what extent these non-EU states, Western Balkan states, voted just like the EU member states. Very shortly, because you know that this is the scope of the OSCE is quite big, so they are tackling a lot of different issues: political, military, environmental, economic, human dimension. So the OSCE has a very broad scope of action, and participating states in the OSCE use their declaratory power to make so in their foreign policy. So measuring the alignment with EU statements is a good indicator in this case of this Europeanization. The EU is a very particular actor, peculiar actor in the OSCE, because it extended its possibility to align. So the possibility to align it offers to non-EU states over the past 5 to 6 years. It started just with four countries in 2004. Now the EU offers alignment to 17 countries. So it means that sometimes when the EU speaks in the OSCE, it speaks for 44 countries. The OSCE membership is 56. So you can imagine the power, the declarative power of the EU in this multilateral forum. About this alignment mechanism, I'll not go into details, but you have two phases. One is internal coordination. EU member states coordinate, find a declaration all together, and then they open it to non-EU states. The non-EU states do not participate actively to drafting. They cannot bring their own ideas. So it's quite asymmetrical in this respect. Also, there is an important change. So after Lisbon, the EU decided somehow that alignment should be self-sufficient. Now, if you align with the EU, you are no longer allowed to speak in addition to that on your national capacity. So it makes the alignment tool very, very powerful for the EU, but also very critical. So it is very much criticized by non-EU states, because they cannot speak when they align. What about the results? These are the results for Western Balkans. You can see that overall, Western Balkan states align with more than 95% of EU declarations and EU statements in the OSCE. The case of Serbia is a little bit below this percentage, still quite high, so it's more than 80%. But much higher, for instance, than Armenia or Black Sea region countries, for instance. We'll come I'll try to explain this frequency and why there's differences. Now, if I skip to the United Nations General Assembly, again, the scope is huge of the resolutions passed to votes in this assembly. The EU also has a certain power. It's not structured the same way as in the OSCE. Institutionally, it is weaker also. In the OSCE, it can't really take the floor. In the UN, this is more complicated. And the mechanism is quite similar, actually. So the EU informs the non-EU states about its position, and the non-EU states may then align by voting the same. These are the results for the 15 past years. And then you can see that there is clear convergence. We started for the Western Balkan states in 93 with alignment frequency of 40%. Now it's over 90% again. So shortly said, nowadays the Western Balkan states vote exactly the same as EU member states in the UNGA. So how do we explain that? We could think that, well, they have to. because they are heading towards the EU. So this is a condition, and it is actually a condition. You have two kinds of obligation stemming from the EU. One is procedural. Somehow there is an obligation to coordinate, to consult each other, to inform about policy decisions and so on. And there is a substantive obligation. This substantive obligation reads that non-EU states or Western Balkan states should ensure converging positions on international issues. So it's quite a strong tool. But still, if you look at the dates, we have convergence which was before these provisions, so conditionality provisions. So it does not fully explain. Also, if you talk to diplomats, why do they align? Mostly they do not answer that we have to. They have other explanations. So this role of conditionality in foreign policy, in my assessments and through these interviews and so on, only plays a marginal role. The most decisive factor is socialization, and how they explain this alignment is that we are Europeans, so we are participating to European foreign policy. We are defining, and this is a very interesting trait if you compare that with Black Sea region states, for instance, they define their national interests not in individualistic terms, but in collective terms. They put as foreign policy objective in the OSCE or in the UN General Assembly the fact of becoming European, so acceding to the EU at the first place. They are not trying to upload somehow their national interest individualistically. So it is a very distinctive explanation for that. Of course, there is, when they receive, you can see that also when they receive these alignments, these EU statements, they have a very, so the Western Balkan states have a very peculiar way of reading them. Most of them, except to a lesser extent Serbia, read them with the assumption that they will align, whatever is written, if I summarize very roughly. So they have a very positive assumption on that. They do not question directly the contents. They do not have keywords, for instance, which will trigger some, well, you say suspicion or critical minds. Serbia is considering the statement a little bit differently, of course, because it has the Kosovo issue. It has a lot of supporters also, maybe with Russia or Iran. So when these declarations are talking about these national interests, it causes some kind of a cognitive process through which they critically consider the texts. So it's a different approach to reading of the texts. Finally, you can notice that for most, again, except Serbia in this case, the alignment procedure is very much routinized for most of Western Balkan states. Not only routinized, but also externalized, deconcentrated. For many of these Western Balkan states, decisions are taken in Vienna for the OSCE or in New York, not in the capital. The diplomats do not need to go back, ask for instructions before voting for many issues or before aligning with EU statements. This is different a little bit with Serbia, and even more different for states of the Black Sea region, where they have to go back to the capital. And this makes a difference because the diplomats in Vienna or in New York, they meet regularly with the EU. They are very much together. So they are much more sensitive to these socialization effects. So it makes a difference to deconcentrate this foreign policy. Finally, emulation. Emulation only plays a marginal role. Montenegro, for instance, or Albania will argue that they align because the EU is a perfect world somehow, but it's only very marginal. What is more important is for small-sized countries, this is an opportunity to align because you're economizing energy, you're economizing staff resources. The EU has a lot of expertise. For a state like Macedonia, who has no embassy, for instance, in Azerbaijan, it's impossible for her to know what's happening if it's grounded, what the statements against Azerbaijan or human rights in Azerbaijan, for instance, is told. So the fact that the EU provides this expertise to non-EU states is beneficial to these states because it allows them to expand the scope of their foreign policy to minimal costs. So this would be for the explanations. In conclusion, if you look at the statistics very roughly, you see that there is no real distinction between what is EU and non-EU in many cases. Non-EU states, Western Balkan states especially, are already behaving like European member states, but you should look more closely. There are good reasons to align, there are bad reasons to align. There are also shallow changes, so if you're just imitating, for instance, or if you're considering seriously the fact of aligning. In this respect, we have to be careful with this alignment mechanism, not taking it as a benchmark necessarily. I mean, the way Serbia approaches alignments, or Turkey also, or Switzerland, for instance, which do not align at all as a policy, should not put them in the category of bad Europeans necessarily. You have to listen to the reasons, the grounds of these countries. So this would be my conclusion. Thank you.
Let me thank to my all panelists because their papers were really well structured and theoretically informed. So unfortunately, the time does not allow us to focus on that. So I would like to, in fact, close the session. But if there isn't any person who necessarily want to ask a question, a very enthusiastic one, if there is. Maybe we can take one or two questions at the most, and somebody can bring the microphone to him or her. Okay, yeah. But please try to be very brief.
It will be a very short question. I would like to ask Florent about the OEC, or I mean the importance of organization, because I heard some, complaints that this organization is actually, falling, and the importance is very, weak, and this is not a serious player on the European scene. And I do not agree with this, but the fact is that. So this is the question. Thank you very much indeed.
Another one?
Yes,
yeah.
Thank you. A very, very brief comment on what you have said regarding the alignment mechanism. I think that when you take it as a whole, probably it looks that EU should consider its alignment mechanism. But there are, of course, policies and parts where this alignment works pretty well. I recently did a research on integrated border management, where EU has built a number of institutions and policies, etc., where I actually saw that it worked well because for some countries in Western Balkans, simply this was a ready-made solution for a problem that they couldn't solve. So that's my comment, and thank you.
Okay. And maybe the last one. No? Okay. Can you react to these comments and questions, please, very briefly again?
So, about the crisis, the OSCE crisis. Well, it is a concern. It is. I wouldn't be so harsh on the OSCE because the OSCE has a very peculiar way of dealing. It deals with inclusive politics of inclusiveness, unlike the EU, unlike many different actors. It means that it may act, although there are a lot of obstacles, on the basis of the fact that states like, for instance, Belarus are participating states in the OSCE. It gives a legitimacy to the OSCE to criticize Belarus, which the EU has not. So it makes a difference in this sense. And then I would be a little bit critical about the EU and the possibility that it weakens the OSCE somehow, because it has somehow its own agenda in the OSCE. But we should not forget the fact that the EU is an actor which is more exclusive than the OSCE. So both organizations have a very complementary role. About the research you made, I will be happy to discuss that with you after
decision.
Marco and Vladimir, have you got any comments? Okay, so I need to close the session, unfortunately. I was informed by Philip that we need to go to hotel, and there will be a bus departing at a quarter to 7 for the reception. Then we will be at the reception hall by 7 o'clock. So let me thank to all participants, all paper givers during the whole day. It was a very long and tiring day, but there happened very efficient and theoretically informed debates. Thank you very much for all of you coming here. Thank you.